Okay, well, a good day, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Crapper. Today with the one and only Peter Turner.
Hello.
And myself, Tim Appleton. I don't know why people say myself. It should be me, shouldn't it? I don't know. I don't know why the reflexive pronoun is so widely used. Doesn't seem to add anything. Anyway, let's get on with it. Today we're doing another topographic trumps, as we're calling it. That's to say, a head-to-head, an album off, an album war, if you like.
Yeah.
Album war of attrition, I'm calling it. And tonight's going to be between Tommy by The Who and Quadrophenia by The Who. And we're going to be looking at, we've got a series of six weighted categories. We've adjusted them slightly from the last one we did because we think that it depends on the analytical categories. I think need to fit the material, so it depends on the band. So it's not exactly the one we used last time when we did Tales from Topographic Oceans and the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. But our first category is playing, sound and arrangements all together, and that gets 10 points. And then we get the theme, which gets 10 points. And then we have the lyrics, 10 points. Cover, 5 points. Compositional coherence, 15 points. And then musical inspiration gets 50 points. That's obviously, for us, that's the whacking category.
Yeah.
That does over-determine, as it were, all the other categories. But it's not that the other categories aren't important. It's just that we feel like that's the one where we can really make a decisive decision, as it were. Decisive decision. That's redundant, isn't it? A sort of major decision as to the material. We, as usual, we have a complete paucity of empirical information as we start off. I guess people will know the Who album chronology, right? We start with My Generation let's go from memory. My Generation 65, is it?
Yeah.
Quick One While He's Away, 66.
Yeah.
I believe. The Who Sell Out, 67.
Pretty consistent, aren't they?
Yeah. And then a 2-year gap before Tommy, which is their first double, concept album. One of the first not concept album perhaps, but one of the first sort of rock operas, as they say.
Yeah.
And then we have Who's Next, right? Which comes out in 71, I think, which was supposed to be Lifehouse, right? Which is this sort of mega project that Pete Townsend was working on. I suppose that would have been another double. I don't know.
Yeah.
There was certainly enough material for a double, but I don't know what he had in mind there. Anyway, it finally came out as a single album, Who's Next? And then we've got Quadrophenia is the 6th album. And Quadrophenia is also, like Tommy, is a double. And again, it's a rock opera. It's a concept album.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's it really. We're gonna go through be comparing the two double concept albums. I think before we begin, perhaps I don't know if you have any sort of laconic remark, Peter. I think for me, I would say that what's interesting is what was interesting in this was. Sort of examining the relationship between the two albums. I mean, we have this idea. Pete Townsend talks about he wrote Quadrophenia as specifically as a response to Tommy. So it was like he wanted a touring vehicle to replace Tommy in their live set, right? But I'm also kind of interested in the thematic relation between the two albums. Because you've got one is about Quadrophenia is about the mods. But of course they started as mods. So it's kind of a flashback. And in fact, the whole story of Quadrophenia is a flashback story, interestingly. But, Tommy is a kind of hippie album, isn't it? In inverted commas. And so I'm interested in whether Quadrophenia was sort of a thematic response to Tommy as well, in the sense like, let's go back to basics and, let's abandon the hippie stuff or not. That was my feeling. Do you have any sort of initial thoughts you would like to share?
It's almost like going back to square one, isn't it, with Quadrophenia? Like they've rediscovered what they were originally, and they've sort of gone through it. What was really interesting about listening to them is I know both the albums well, but I'd never really thought of it in terms of when you start comparing albums. You somehow have to find a difference, which are clear on here, the differences, but sort of almost start grading things against other things. And it does bring up things that maybe ideas that you hadn't considered before, and how good some of the parts are, and how lax some of the other parts are when you actually start to listen to it in a sort of analytical way. But it was really nice to sort of go back,
because
sort of have a listen through.
You've always been a big Who fan?
Yeah, kind of. I know I say it about everything, but like what I find is that I don't have set stuff that I listen to a lot. It just isn't. It doesn't work like that with me. So what it is I will listen to something for a sort of period of time, and then it probably won't listen to it for like 5 years. Right. It's like it becomes sort of, it's like you keep eating it, and then you just stop. And then you go back to it and think, oh yeah, I remember all this, and you know it really well, but only because you've just gorged yourself on it for a while. I don't think I do the rounds as such. I tend to just have a lot of it in one go, I think.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, actually thinking back, I think that it was you that introduced me to the Who. I mean, I knew who they were, I knew who the Who were, but I think it was you that introduced me to Tommy specifically.
Oh, really?
I didn't really know much about it. You gave me a tape of it, I think. When we were
right. I think it was. I think a quick one was actually not quick one. The Sellout was the first one that I actually knew, which is a bit of an odd one to sort of start with. But yeah. Yes, I think that was the first.
It's slightly anomalous, isn't it, Sellout? But anyway.
Yeah. People don't tend to mention that one.
We'll talk about that another day. Well, it might come up. In the discussion. I've got one or two choice words on the sort of proto rock operas. Anyway, okay. So let's begin with playing, sound, and arrangements. Then for 10 points. Do you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, so playing, sound and arrangement I take as being, how well they're playing it, what it sounds like, how well it's recorded, and the sort of arrangements as in what do you do when you're a sort of three-piece, with a Roger Daltrey? How do you sort of go about showing this music? And I have to say, I mean, Tommy is quite a purist album, really. I mean, when you sort of rake through what they've done, there's not much adornments there, which is really to their credit, I think. They've kind of kept it very, very purist and very able to be played live. There is overdubs and things, but essentially, it's the horn bits that you sort of notice sticking out a little bit on there, and a few sort of keyboardy bits as well. The recording sounds beautiful. I mean, for 1969, I imagine it must have been quite, a real revelation, this kind of double album of something which sustains so well. And yeah, it sounds glorious, I think the whole thing does. And the thing I've really noticed is that Keith Moon, when you start listening to them, how much he actually impacts upon their sound, it's like I haven't really thought of it like that. And I tend to, and Sean would probably kill me for this, but I tend to kind of ignore drummers actually, and I don't really notice what they're doing. But when you start listening to Keith Moon and his kind of wild approach to stuff, which I don't think they could tame, anyway, it really defines their sound, I think, actually.
Difficult to ignore Keith Moon, isn't it?
It is. Well, yeah, imagine knowing him. It would be difficult to ignore him then, but I just think that he really defines their sound. Do you want me to do scores afterwards?
Yeah.
How are we doing it? Yeah.
I mean, you talked about Tommy there. You haven't really talked about Quadrophenia.
No, Quadrophenia, yeah. So Quadrophenia, I have to say, is it's like 4 years on, isn't it? And the rock business had evolved, since then. And I think you're just going to get a better quality ultimately. There's less of that kind of obvious, where they sort of cut things and maybe glue things together. You get a much clearer sound for that. But it's very heavy on sound effects. That's what I noticed with Quadrophenia. It's not. I don't think they really use them much in Tommy, but on here they do. They set a lot of the scenes using sound. It's like they've just discovered that you can have a field recording, It's much more rocky, this album, as well. I mean, just the way they arrange things seems like it's got a sort of, it's a bit more straightforward in terms of rock. It's like Tommy, I think they've thought a little bit about the music maybe, and on here they're more sort of rocking out more. The arrangements are pretty simplistic though. It just lacks some of the creativity I think you get on Tommy. The ways in which things can be done has been sort of hammered out slightly into easier sort of ways of doing things. However, Roger Daltrey sounds exceptional, I think, on Quadrophenia. His vocals, it's like they're really on the edge almost all the time. And on Tommy, it sounds like a different singer, I think. It's that kind of... It sounds a bit more dreamy on Tommy, whereas on Quadrophenia, he's belting it out. Really like strong leadership. And I think this album needs something like that. It really needs someone at the front belting this stuff out, because I don't think it has enough strength to sort of sustain without someone really like feeling it, So yeah, that's how I feel about both. Do you want some points, or how are we doing?
Tell us your points for each.
Well, for Tommy, I've given a 9 out of 10
right.
for playing, sound and arrangement, and I've given Quadrophenia an 8.
Okay, right. So Tommy pips it to the post there on that one. Yeah. All right, good. So. Interesting, yeah. Yes, so, I mean, I've got playing. Now, I'm not a huge... This is where we're going to get into trouble. I'm not a huge fan of The Who's playing in general. I think John Entwistle, I think, is amazing musician. And I think Roger Daltrey has a wonderful voice. I think he's a brilliant singer. I don't know why they let Pete Townsend sing so much, because he's not awful, Pete Townsend, but he's nowhere near like Roger Daltrey, is he? And I don't know how you feel about Pete Townsend's guitar playing. I think he's all right, as a sort of rhythm guitarist above all else.
I think when you hear him play live, like I listened to the Afton Down Festival 1970, they do most of Tommy on that. They play it live. His rhythm playing is incredible on, Pinball Wizard. Amazing live, really good rhythm player.
Yes, I suppose he is a good rhythm player, isn't he? He has to do a lot of work because he's got to really fill the sound out.
Yeah.
Perhaps a little bit too much work. But and so I think, for that reason, like there's quite a sparse sound, especially on Tommy. I think because he's responsible for. In fact, I think they were going to put an orchestra on Tommy, if I'm not mistaken. Right. And then they didn't bother, and then they were going to do some extra guitar parts, and they didn't bother either. So this apparently this wasn't the finished version. So I think you're right. I think that's perhaps why it doesn't sound. It sounds quite live because first of all they could reproduce this quite easily live, and it's fairly sort of direct sounding. But also I think that they were anticipating overdubbing more stuff on it because I think Kit Lambert wanted to put an orchestra on it. Kit Lambert's an important name here. The band's manager, one of them. Elephant in the Room. I'm not a big fan of Keith Moon's drumming.
Right.
Now, is he a good drummer or not? I mean, some people seem to really rate him. I suppose he's a more adventurous drummer than most of his contemporaries, right? But but I think that what I can't stand about him is he sort of wanders on and off the beat all the time, and for me that kind of undermines a lot of the Who's recordings, really. You say what you like about Kenny Jones, but at least he did keep the beat. But I suppose on the other hand, with Keith Moon, it's all about his personality, isn't it? But you don't really. I don't care about that so much when I'm listening to an album. You
could have a whole conversation about the Who just as people, actually, couldn't you?
Well, yeah.
They're an interesting group.
They are. They're an interesting combination of personalities, aren't they?
Yeah.
They sort of hated each other, but and sort of loved each other, at the same time. But what else? So, I note your point about the musique concrète in Quadrophenia, which I mentioned partly so I can shoehorn in the musique concrète jingle in the podcast. And also, like, there's a bit where he's like Pete Townsend's walking along the seafront, and he's recording himself humming or something. And I read this thing. I read his autobiography, and he said, "I realised I could just record myself like walking down the shore and singing." I thought, obviously, why hadn't that occurred to you before? But it's got some nice programmatic points. Quadrophenia, when Love Rain Over Me, the guitar. Notes kind of fall like rain, I think that's kind of clever. But I think that in general, I find the arrangements more interesting, slightly more interesting on Tommy. I think Quadrophenia is more polished, but a bit more boring and a bit more monotonous. You know, I even think in a way the sound is slightly better on Tommy. It's a bit brighter, which perhaps goes with the theme. And yeah, it's just sort of more. Quadrophenia is obviously more polished because it's later on, but perhaps almost too polished. I mean, I think the themes are very starkly, clearly, and confidently stated on Tommy, aren't they? You know, again, perhaps because it wasn't the finished version. But so yeah, that's my sort of general thoughts. I've given Tommy 8 and Quadrophenia 7. Because I think Tommy sounds slightly more interesting, but there's not a big difference between them because it's still the you doing it, isn't it? Right,
all the way from Shepherd's Bush,
the you. All right, good. So now let's move on to category 2, which is theme. There are 10 points available for the theme. Now, do you want to kick us off on this?
A whopping 10 points. So I'll sort of do it the other way around, maybe. I mean, Quadrophenia is set in 1965, apparently. I did sort of read up a little bit on it. They were quite... It's fairly reflective, this, isn't it? Because it's sort of... It's like about them, you know, and Jimmy, the character in it, sort of meets like Roger Daltrey as such, you know, and there's this good vibe... My Generation thing is dropped in. And he talks to Jimmy, you know, about sort of, oh yeah, I was like you when I was young. So it's quite reflective about their past. I'm thinking it's not that long. You know, this is like, it's amazing, isn't it? The pace at which things changed back then. Because this is only like 1973. It's only like 8 years later. And yet unrecognisable, you know, from the first album, really. I really like the setting of this, of Quadrophenia, because it's set in like 1965. It has that kind of black and white romance to it. I'm always been a really big fan of those sort of turn of the 60s films, the sort of 59, 60, and a sort of British black and white kitchen sink stuff. I love all that. And so I love that kind of the romance of that, of the child sort of escaping, you know, fed up with parents. They find the pills. You know, he's got these sort of dead end jobs. He sort of destroys his bike, goes off to Brighton, gets a crap job, and then, well, we're not sure, but kind of possibly drowns at the end. I mean, it's called Drowned, the last track. So it has this tragedy to it, and I love a story, as I'm sure you know I've made out so many times on Crap It before. A good story will really draw me in, and what I really like about Quadrophenia is the theme itself, actually, which kind of overpowers everything else in some way, which is odd because, you know, normally it's musical things, isn't it? But I think the tragedy in this story and the sort of energy which it propels itself towards it, you know, is really well managed. I think, you know, it's kind of it's a believable story, basically, which has really sort of personal and impassioned, I think. So it's done really well, that. But it is quite self-reflective. I think that they're kind of looking back, aren't they, on, you know, what, you know, the youth and how, you know, how do we sort of deal with these things and what they've been through themselves. And it's slightly late for the mods, isn't it? This is like... It's sort of in the future, looking back on it. It just seems out of step, actually. But I suppose all things, you know, need time for reflection. The theme of Tommy, I find it's really ambitious. It's very ambitious to try and bring something like that to life. You know, sort of part reality, isn't it? But it's quite this. It's got a kind of supernatural side to it, isn't it? And I can't quite put my finger on what it is, because it's in a way quite practical and straightforward, isn't it? What's happened to this boy? You know, there's been some, what we call an childhood ace, you know, an adverse childhood experience has, you know, blinded him to the world, you know, and he can't hear or feel or speak. But within that, there's a kind of supernaturalness, isn't there? There's something else going on, because he manages to sort of come out of that in some way, but still retain those, you know, disabilities, but be more able than other people. It is also very dark, Tommy, and all that. I mean, it's quite macabre in some ways, I find, Tommy, because it has, you know, when you get to things like Tommy's holiday camp, it's like, oh my God, what this is like. You know, we've been through Cousin Kevin, you know, Uncle Ernie, and those sort of horrible moments in there. And then, Tommy's Holiday Camp, it's like, my God, what is this? It's like, it seems to start fairly serious, but it just gets worse and worse, darker and darker, I think, this album. I don't know whether they thought it was at the time, but it strikes with me as being, it's quite heavy, the theme in here. It's quite modern, though. If you think about sort of mental health at the moment, which is the big, the big thing, it kind of has come full circle in that it's kind of, this is about childhood experience, and what it does to people. So I'm really not quite sure how I feel about the theme of Tommy. It's weird because with Quadrophenia, the theme is everything to me. Right. It really drives the album. With Tommy, I don't know whether the theme is something that's that important, because I think the music is so good in Tommy. It kind of like, if you could put these two things together, I'd be a happy man.
I mean, perhaps it's a bit too early to mention this, but presumably, of course, you've seen the Ken Russell film.
I have, but a long time ago.
I mean, it's all over the bloody shop.
That makes it even worse for me. It's even darker.
So, I asked Sean once what he thought of it, what he thought of Ken Russell's Tommy, and he said, "I thought it was a pile of shit." That's what he said. That was his comment. Yeah. So, okay. So, is that all then? Do you want to give scores then?
Well, for theme, I mean, Quadrophenia wins for me. Right. I give it a 9 out of 10. I really like the theme of Quadrophenia, and I give it a 7 for Tommy.
That's very interesting. You'll see why in a second. Now, if you'll accompany me into Tim's pedantry corner here. Now, I've got loads of notes here, but I'm going to try and get through as quick as I can. First of all, I very much identify with what you're saying, and my thoughts were a little bit similar, actually. I think basically both albums have the same theme. This is the argument I'm going to defend, which I think is basically the Who's basic question, which is about sexual identity, right? Yeah. I.e., am I a boy or a girl? Basically, because I mean, Tommy even begins with this question, right? Is it a boy or a girl? And you get this triumphant response.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a boy, right? And I think that they take this question further, really, than any other band of the 60s. As you say, it's kind of ahead of its time in a way. I think the Smiths come back to it later on. But it was a big question in Pete Townshend's life, right? Because I think he suspected he was abused himself, and his autobiography is called "Who I Am," right? Which is, of course, the supposed answer to the question, who am I? Basically, And I was thinking, actually, even that if I may, the name of the band, the Who, is like who is this person that's speaking, basically? Yeah. And of course, there's a psychoanalytic dimension here, right? Because, as you were saying earlier, according to psychoanalysis, right, there's two basic questions, male and female. I promise not to go into too much detail here, but the female question, which is the hysteric question, the question posed by the hysteric, which is am I a man or a woman, right? And then the male question is the obsessional question, which is do I exist or not, basically, i.e., am I enough, right? And all this really all resolves into the question of who is the master? Because what a hysteric does, is that they're trying to they want to have a master, right? And the obsessive is asking themselves, am I actually a master or not? So this is the sort of male-female psychological subjective positions, right? Now, I think that both of these albums basically involve a search for masters, right? And this is what you were sort of alluding to, actually, with the supernatural element. And I think Tommy is more on the hysterical side, because it's like the sexual relationship to the master is ambiguous. You've got Sally Simpson falling in love with the person who might be Tommy or not. And in fact, there's an identification between Tommy and Meher Baba, who was like Townshend's guru, right? This guy, right? Indian guy. And he also confesses that he was sort of an object of sexual desire for him. Like he dreamt about, he had sexualized dreams about him. Anyway, and Quadrophenia is more on the obsessive side. It's like he's trying to find like a principle of order in his life, right? And he's like, one of the things that the obsessive does is this constantly looking around for figures of the master that he can identify with. I say he purposely.
The Godfather.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's what I was going to say. The Punk and the Godfather is about who's in charge, right? And bellboy, right?
Yeah.
Because bellboy is obviously the bell is psychoanalytically speaking is a penis, and the bellboy is like the fallen master. It's the one that he copied when he was originally starting out as a mod, and then he's become a sort of big disappointment to him. And then of course, I'm One. The song I'm One is a reiteration of the obsessive question mark. So I think the two psychoanalytic questions are kind of mixed together on both albums. In fact, like Pinball is actually a mod reference, of course, right? Because the idea came from this book by Nick Cohen, Arthur, Teenage Pinball Queen, that was the name of the book, which was based on a real person that used to, like a woman who was pretending to be a man who used to play in Kit Lambert and Chris Stamp's pinball hall that they owned in London, right? Because they blew all their money, didn't they, on these weird projects. So, the mods are sort of like admirable figures, like role models, kind of masculine to some extent, but also they have this androgynous side, right? Like this girl Arthur, is she a boy, is she a girl? Yeah. And of course, mods are supposed to be traditionally considered slightly effeminate, unlike the rockers who are very, very macho,
Yeah.
But as I say, like the key difference is the status of the master in the two works, right? So in Tommy, I think the master is sort of replete but completely fantasized, like an angel, and Tommy is the master, or isn't he? But basically he takes on an angelic position, because of course angels don't have sex, right? They don't have sexuality, right? The deaf, dumb, and blind kid. That's supposed to represent the angelic position, because it's the ignorance towards sexuality. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. Evil being sex, of course. And of course, this is a response to trauma, because he sees his mum having sex with his uncle, is it, or with Keith Moon, or whoever it is. I get lost sometimes. And then in Quadrophenia, Jimmy realizes at the end that there is no master.
No.
And this is why I completely agree with you that Quadrophenia is the better story, because he goes through all the psychoanalytic stuff, and I think this kind of represents progress. I mean, some people say he commits suicide at the end, right? But I don't think it's really about that. I think it's about whether he's abandoned his search for a master, really. And I think my interpretation of it is that is a way out of the sort of sexual deadlock, really, basically.
Yeah.
So, in other words, Tommy seems to resolve, but actually doesn't. It ends with a decision not to decide. He just has this sort of delirium about being a master or not. Yeah. And like famously, Quadrophenia is not supposed to resolve, but I think actually it does. Like, it's the best resolution that they could have had for the story. And it basically, he ends up concluding that the only way out of the deadlock is love, basically, right? And that's why he sings "Love, Rain on Me." So it's interesting they have to go through the obsessive position to get there. But anyway, so in conclusion, my points are exactly the same as yours. I got 7 for Tommy and 9 for Quadrophenia, because I think that Quadrophenia is the answer to Tommy, thematically, basically.
I mean, the interesting thing is that the themes, though, is that between them, it was like the most interesting thing about listening to them, actually, was just what are these albums actually about. I found was interesting, but at the same time, Tommy is a bigger feat of imagination. I think if you were to create a double album, a rock opera from nothing, Tommy is a really interesting idea, isn't it? Because no one would expect there's a complete one-off. But the story of a disillusioned teenager, kind of finding his way, is a bit more obvious. But it actually works better. But Tommy is a bigger feat of imagination. I think. Is it good for '69? I suppose.
Well, stories should be sort of like boring up to a certain point, shouldn't they? They should be sort of monotonous in order for you to achieve a kind of enlightenment through them. If they're like all fantasy, as you were saying earlier, they lose their dramatic tension. Yeah. And I think there's a lack of dramatic tension in Tommy, unlike in Quadrophenia, where they it's deeply dramatic. I think it's much more successful. I think.
So was Quadrophenia taken on the road? Did they do it as a live thing?
Yeah. And there was some perplexity at the beginning, I think, a bit like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway when they start playing it live before the albums even come out, and people are just going, what bloody hell are they playing? But I think that the only thing was that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Quadrophenia kind of fell away quicker, and they basically ended up playing Tommy again, after a year or so. So in that sense, it was a failure for Townsend, but Yeah. Anyway, all right, good. Well, very interesting. So I think. So let's go into category 3 then, lyrics. 10 points available here. What's your thinking on the words, Peter?
So on lyrics, well, I actually printed out the lyrics for Quadrophenia because I have far less understanding of what was going on in there. But I'll talk about Tommy first, which is I think it's a hard one to do. The sort of, you know, this domestic supernatural lyric thing is hard to do without making it too obvious, basically. And I think some of it is clearly you're steered in a certain direction, like he goes to the doctor, he's born here, his dad dies, or whatever, and that sort of stuff. But then it becomes a bit more ethereal, which is correct, you know, it's the way it should be. And when we get to the end of Tommy, you know, it's like, where are we? You know, the story is sort of anywhere at that point, isn't it? It's a bit weird, you're not sure what's going on, but that's fine, because that's the kind of, it's got a magical sort of you know, feel to it, so you kind of fill in the gaps yourself, don't you? But I think what's really clever about Tommy, I really like the inner voice, because you get everyone's opinion, don't you? Everyone's got something to say, you know. Everyone has something to say about this boy, and then suddenly it just drops in, doesn't it? The inner voice of Tommy, the see me part. And it's like, oh my God, that's him, you know. And I really like that moment where he's actually, and also, of course, he says, you know, you didn't hear it, you didn't see it, or whatever. And you've got him in the background, you can just hear him responding. I really like that sort of success. And he sort of comes out of himself as you go through it. There is some really awkward, you know, lyrical moments, though. I mean, they don't pull any punches, anyway, when it comes to lyrics. I mean, they can be quite crude. And, you know, they've got it gets worse on Quadrophenia, but, you know, gonna rape you, you know, seems to be a perfectly okay phrase for like a main chorus, you know, we're just going to stick that in. On the whole, though, I think they handle the sort of abstract nature of it quite well, you know, it's sort of open-ended, which is good, but it has a great start, you know, you just, you know, going back in time, you can see you know, what's happening here. Yeah. And that moment is a lovely moment where, you know, where they say, what is it, I can't remember. I think I'll come back to it actually in another bit. Sorry, I forgot what it was. With Quadrophenia, it's kind of the character of Jimmy, I think, is really strong. It's well established. You sort of you know where he's coming from. You know, you can feel his frustrations. I think that's done really well. You want to sort of follow him. You know, he's like a goodie. I think that's what it is. I was talking about this, like when they talk about stories and things. You know, there's got to be like a baddie, you know, but this is our hero, you know, we want him to succeed.
Can I just ask, do you when you picture Jimmy, do you think of Phil Daniels, or do you think of that fella that they had on the cover?
The cover. Guy on the cover. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? You've got this sort of, you've been given an image, basically. Yeah. I mean, there are, though, if you just like, you know, if you don't mind, I'll just go through there are some terrible phrases and ideas on this.
I thought I've written down some of my least favourite lines as well. I thought we might get to this point. Go on, carry on.
So I ended up. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So on Quadrophenia, I ended up with the preacher, and full of lies and hate. I seemed to scare him a little, so he showed me to the Golden Gate. It's like, what does he mean? Does he mean what? He killed you. You went to the heaven or California? I don't get that at all. There's a bit here. It says, "I'm a man who looks after the pigs. Usually, I get along okay. I am a man who reveals all he digs." What the hell? What? Everything he digs out, he reveals in some way. I'll give you one more because you probably want one. My mama threw me out. They finally threw me out. My mother got drunk on stout. Which is just like, it's just silly. And I don't know, they just don't seem to be able to handle some of it. But there are some devastating lines like you know, if you complain, you disappear, like the lesbians and queers. If you get beaten up by blacks. Girls of 15 sexually knowing. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's just, who is it? I'll take it. Who is she? I'll rape it. And she's a virgin. I'm going to be the first in. I mean, they're really dated lyrics, but they don't. Not many bands do that. Actually, that kind of stuff, do they?
That's right. Yeah.
Do you want some scores?
Yeah, go for it. Scores on the doors.
I do think lyrically, Quadrophenia I prefer, given even with the stuff that I've just said, just because I think that it's just clearer what's going on basically, and it draws it on, and so the lyrics support the music well. So I've given that a 9. I've given Tommy a 7, but on reflection, probably deserves slightly more than that. Maybe I'll give it an 8.
Okay, I'm just for my own amusement. I'm just checking what I've given. Yeah, okay, right. Okay. This is interesting.
Okay.
I think we're slightly on the same page here. So look, yeah, I mean, I ended up writing a list of in this category. I was thinking, now how do I approach this? And I ended up writing a list of all the lines that I thought were really too much, as you said. So first of all, I'd say I think the title of Quadrophenia is more interesting than Tommy.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, should have been called Amazing Journey. Why wasn't it called Amazing Journey? That was the working title, wasn't it? Much better title, in my view.
Yes. They're single word titles, aren't they, for these two?
Yeah, I suppose
they didn't do with the other albums.
Purposeful, isn't it? So yeah, although like Quadrophenia is a better title, but I mean, shouldn't it have been Quadrophenia? I mean,
schizophrenia.
Yeah, I mean, I've never quite got that. I mean, it seems to be like a condensation of schizophrenia and quadrophonic, which is just weird. I think that issue, by the way, about like he's doubly schizophrenic, is just a load of nonsense. Right. I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
I think the quad refers to the 4 though, because he gives them Pete Townsend gives them themes, doesn't he? Each band member has a theme within the album, so the quad thing works well with that as well.
Yeah, again, it's the gang thing, isn't it? Like sort of this kind of mutual identification between young men. So, like, he's worried that the band's going to break up. So he basically specifically writes something based on 4 different personalities.
Yeah,
and the 4 personalities are the 4 members of the band, and they're supposed to represent for the 4 different sides of Jimmy or whatever. But the idea that because the premise seems to be like quadrophenic. As opposed to schizophrenic, because schizophrenic means 2 and quadrophenic, but that's just nonsense. I mean, schizophrenia is not like a split personality, although can have to do with manic depression, which is a kind of like a doubling. But I mean, they're obviously not talking about that. What I wanted to say was, I think that in general, Townsend's lyrics are okay. I think I think some bands can't write lyrics, can they? But he can. I think.
No.
I think
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of I find that I identify with his authorial voice, as it were, and I think the turns of phrase are generally, with the honourable exceptions of the ones you already read, are generally quite competent and frequently quite humorous. He uses bathos from time to time. So I think there's enough there to make it all work, I think. And for me, this applies to both albums. I don't see a major difference between them. But yeah, I think you're right. Some of it is very uncomfortable, isn't it? The constant references to child abuse are like a bit much, as it were. I mean, you could say, well, it's a different time, but I don't think it was okay even then, to be honest. And I think Fiddle About, even though that's written by John Entwistle, probably wins the prize for the least politically correct song in the history of rock. What do you think?
And they did it live. You would think it would just be an album, like a little album track. They did it live.
I know, yeah. Listen up. Now we're going to do Fiddle About. Here we go. Yeah, great. What else? I wrote down a few of the lines that I thought were particularly bad. Yes. I mean, to be honest, talk about political incorrectness. That deaf, dumb, and blind kid sure plays a mean pinball. I mean, it's like they're just playing tragedy for comedy, isn't it? They're not holding back at all. He ain't got no distractions, can't hear those buzzers and bells, don't see no lights are flashing, plays by sense of smell.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Such a supple wrist. Which presumably is a masturbation joke. I mean, this is a reference to pictures of Lily, perhaps.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they do have that sense of humour, though, don't they? But the thing is, with Pinball Wizard, so well known, that song, the lyrics start to die off. I think the more popular the tune becomes, the lyrics kind of become like almost irrelevant, don't they? You can happily sing along with that and not really know even what you're singing.
Well, I know, but this is pop music, isn't it? This is what pop rock music is like. I mean, as long as the lyrics aren't like too bad and they kind of they roll along okay, it's okay. It's just that there's, I mean, It's just that there's occasional moments where you go, ooh, like, do you find that, it's like, there's a bit, like, was it, my fried egg makes me sick first thing in the morning? That's not a very dramatic line, is it? And then there's, I also wrote down, only love can make it rain like the sweat of lovers laying in the fields. Ugh.
Jesus Christ. It's a bit visceral.
It is, isn't it? But yeah, so I've written, in conclusion, I've written exactly what you said. Lyrics are okay. I was going to give sort of 9 for each of them, because I'm always grateful for lyrics that work. But I did dock Tommy a point for its cavalier, political incorrectness, because the rape references are just on
both albums.
Omnipresent. Well, yeah, on both albums, that's true. But they're not played for comedy on Quadrophenia, so grateful for small mercies. So anyway, I've got 8 points for Tommy and 9 points for Quadrophenia there. So they're good marks, but slightly flawed, I would say. Okay, now let's go on to the cover, right? Category 4, 5 points available here.
Yeah.
We need Sean for this, of course, but we'll soldier on as best we can. What are your thoughts on the covers?
I wish I had 2 covers for you to show, actually, but I guess we'll sort that out. Basically, I think, starting with Tommy, it's quite against the grain, I think, this, for 69. I know 67 is like Summer of Love, but things have sort of spiraled out from there. This is quite stark. And also, it's a bit sci-fi-like. It's like a sphere, as far as I can see, the front cover. Sort of cross-hatching, with the band appearing, sort of like this. That idea of the senses, I think, is really brought into focus, because they use the band and these sort of echo motifs with the little lines coming out, like they're touching a void or something. I think that's quite effective, because it's sort of ambiguous what it actually means, that album cover. There's a lot of art inside it, sort of big colour things, but you don't quite know what any of it means, where sort of faces merge into pictures and things. So it's quite abstract, which is what you need, I think, for this. Also, it's just different to what you'd get at the time generally, I think. So it needs something to sort of retain that mystery of the album. What's interesting, though, is that they basically do the same thing on both with the band, which is they have their faces just inside, don't they? Which is, you can just see them on the front cover of Tommy, and then when you go over to Quadrophenia, you don't even notice they're in the wing mirrors. It's just like, oh, that's actually them. Their faces appear in the wing mirrors on the side of the GS scooter or whatever it is he's got.
Can I just say that that's an important psychoanalytic motif as well, because it's to do identity is supposed to be mediated through your image in the mirror.
Oh, so right.
That's actually quite interesting, that on Quadrophenia. Anyway, go ahead.
So they sort of come out. I quite like the Quadrophenia album cover in that it's like, it looks like it's on a stage or something. There's something. It's like the boy on the bike facing away from us is like on a stage. It's like there's some sort of mist about it or something, or a curtain behind it, a bit like the Who on the stage. He's sort of on the stage, but he's facing away. I think the fact that he's facing away is an interesting decision as well. I know that we get the reflection of the band coming back at us, and that can't work otherwise. But just the fact that he's facing away is an interesting one. I love the sort of artwork that goes with it, though, with the black and white photographs, which they've obviously just gone somewhere and, just thrown stuff and smashed up a bike and got in a thing. I mean, they're amateurish, but it does really set the scene, I think, for that. Which I think, if you look at like the Arctic Monkeys, for example, this the second album, those kind of shots they have of houses and things, it kind of looks a bit like that. I think it's a bit groundbreaking in that way. It's an odd thing to have, actually, those sort of stark photographs. So I mean, I like both album covers, but I think Tommy is sort of a better one, actually. I think it's just a bit more unusual for its time. But then in 73, I suppose it's probably hard to know how to sort of be, dramatic and different at that point. But so I've given Tommy a 4 out of 5 for that, and I'm going to give Quadrophenia a 3, I think. Okay.
Right, good. Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought about this, the sci-fi element of Tommy.
It is a bit.
It goes with that. Sci-fi tends to go with that sort of transcendental supernatural thing as well, because you're sort of the limits of science, and you get into the supernatural, don't you, quite quickly with sci-fi. And so you're right, it reflects that. Whereas Quadrophenia is like, as you were saying, it's sort of like social realist, really, isn't it?
But earthy,
in reference to your earlier reference to the sort of social realist cinema movement in Britain. It's good. I mean, I think here we're inverted, because I think for me Quadrophenia is the better cover. I think. Because both aesthetically and conceptually, I would say, because it's supposed to be a flashback, right? So it's a reflection on where they came from. So it's monochrome, in a way that the image is slightly degraded, as it would be in memory. So I think that's a nice touch. I also think it's pretty beautiful, actually. The photos and things. I think that they're pretty amazing looking. I think the photographer did a brilliant job there, really. I mean, I haven't actually ever owned a vinyl copy of this, I have to say. I have with Tommy, but not Quadrophenia. So I haven't seen it in all its glory, as it were. But I think it's basically a triumph, this cover. I don't think Tommy is a bad cover. It has a certain charm, as you say. I think it's a little bit more of the era, because of that sort of slightly post-psychedelic surrealist aspect. And the colours are, in some ways, are welcome. It's a more colourful thing, so it's got an emotional warmth, I suppose, which is what the whole idea of the guru is supposed to point towards. But yeah, I don't think it's epically good, the Tommy cover, right?
No.
So I've given Tommy 4 points and Quad 5, because I think it's for me, just speaking for myself, I think it's kind of difficult to come up with a better cover, really, than something like Quadrophenia. I think it's basically, it works both conceptually and aesthetically, as I said, as I've already said. All right, good. Well, let's go to category 5, right, which is compositional coherence, and we have 15% available, 15 points available for this. So if you wouldn't mind kicking us off.
Yeah, this is where things, it gets a bit harder, this, because you're not looking at looking at the cover or the lyrics. It's a very sort of direct thing, but this is like across the board, and it's quite a lot of music, so I've sort of picked out a few bits that I just think, show the way in either of them. So I'll talk about Tommy first. I think compositionally, this is pretty seamless, actually. It's like you're waiting for them to trip themselves up at some point, because the Who are a certain type of band. You don't think of them as like prog rock band, looking back, obviously things sort of changed after 69 anyway, but they sustain this really well, actually. So for some simple ideas, this is done very well. And I'd say there aren't many difficult changeovers, because as far as I can see, these things tend to be written in blocks, which is you'll have a sequence on Tommy, which will go for 7 or 8 minutes or something, but there's got to be a change at some point. You can't just seamlessly write for a whole double album. Something's going to have to stop and restart, but they do it very well on this album. I think
they're not Jethro Tull, are they?
No, it's not that. We haven't reached that point in sort of musical history yet, but they do it very well, and they'll write a certain amount. Themes start to come in, which they're very patient with it. I have to say, I think that they stretch out ideas to breaking point without them becoming, too repetitive, and then they'll insert a new idea. It's very economical, the writing on this. I think the way they've done it. The over and underture is just like, what a wonderful idea. I mean, this is unheard of in rock music. The overture works brilliantly, obviously written after, I guess, the whole thing was written. It's like, right, let's do the overture. I guess just as a homage to, what an actual overture is. But they beat that even with the underture, which is even longer. I mean, this is like 10 minutes. Without any lyrics. I think that sustains so well. I mean, who'd expect that would work, on paper, if you said, well, let's have 10 minutes at the end, of the first part, and then we'll go, how are you going to do that? But it does sustain. I I sort of question it when I'm listening. I think, does this work, or is this just, sort of repetition with slight sort of variations and a few extra instrumental parts? I think it's really clever how it does it, and the album does need it. It needs a sort of block there. I think some of the themes are cleverly, they repeat unexpectedly. That's what I like, is the way that things suddenly arrive and you think, well, I already know this part, and they've weaved it in again. I think it's great. The ending of the album is superb, I think. It feels like, I think the cleverest thing you can do is when you get to the end of this album and you feel like you've been heading this way, like it's new. This is something which has just been dropped in, it's like a few bits here and there, but suddenly it becomes this crescendo. And I have to say, it is such a great ending to this album. And live, if you've seen the Woodstock film, it's like one of the greatest moments on that film is when you hear Roger Daltrey out of tune singing "See Me, Feel Me," that bit. It's such a great moment. That it's really, the suspense in that is great, and then coming in with the end, which could go on forever. It seems to never run out of energy, that ending. So I think just compositionally, it's really good. I mean, this album works a treat. I think
it's a riff, isn't it? The ending, the very end is a riff. That's the interesting thing about it. The vocals don't actually make it. It's that you need some vocals to sort of ornament it, but basically it's just a riff.
Yeah, but I think it's superb. I imagine that when they got to the end of that, I must have thought, my God, we've actually managed it. The idea of doing this is so odd at the time, I think, to actually pull off this album compositionally and for it to actually work is really clever. And it's amazing. It always amazes me how well they sustain it on so little as well, basically. So as far as I'm concerned, that's like a 13 out of 15. I've given it a 13. I'm not quite sure why. I always feel like 15 would be too much,
Right, yeah.
But so with Quadrophenia, I think it runs coherently, and I think the opening's great, and it runs really well. Fantastic opening. I think when we get to a track called "Helpless Dancer," I've tried to actually track where do they fall over, and I think it's at that point. Right. And then after that, you feel like you're just going through a series of songs, and I know that they are weaving bits in. They do it. He does the approach from Tommy. I just don't think it works as well on Quadrophenia. But I don't think, in a way, it's not the same experience as Tommy. That's the thing. I don't think you think of it as being like Tommy. So we're trying to compare these two, but you don't necessarily have to compare them in terms of the way they're done here. Yeah. The repeating themes, slot in, fairly well. I just don't think it's enough to give the music a feeling of that sort of completeness that you get in Tommy, of it being a whole. There's an attempt to do it, and I think the Love Rain on Me, it feels like he's trying to redo, the end of Tommy again. I think ultimately what it is that the story for me overrides the music in this. And there are some wonderful moments, and we'll get onto that. I do like some great moments in this, but ultimately it doesn't hold together in the way that Tommy does. And it's expected that it does, because it's a story. They didn't have to sell it as a story, but they did. That's the whole idea of this. So I've given it actually an 8 out of 15, which is, about half marks.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Again, excuse me. Again, I sort of, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think, sorry. So I was going to say, like, going back to what I was saying earlier, the sort of hysterical moment in Townsend, am I a boy or a girl? That idea. I think he's always searching, right? And so he's sort of, what the hysteric does is that they're all trying to interact and to work out what they are for somebody else, So rather than whether they can sustain themselves as an individual, sort of thing. And so he writes this, I think, as part of a sort of dialogue with what's going on in the rest of the music scene. So he abandons hit single writing as soon as he can, right? Ironically, because he's quite brilliant at it, at the beginning. He writes a suite on the Who's second album, right? Quick One While He's Away. I think also he was working on him and Kit Lambert, they were working on what they call pop operas, right? Have you heard this? So Happy Jack was supposed to be part of an opera, and I'm a Boy was part of a proposed suite called Quads, right, which predates Quadrophenia. And that was specifically about sexual identity. You know, I'm a boy, but my ma won't admit it, right? Also included a song called Join My Gang, which was sung by Paul Nicholas, right? And it says, if you remember him, and it says, the chorus is, you know, you can join my gang even if you're a girl. And then we have the Rail Suite, right, on the Who Sell Out, which I was sort of alluding to earlier on. Which
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, it contains elements of Tommy because the Underture riff is in there, isn't it? And then you get Tommy, and then you get Lifehouse, which didn't come out, and then Quadrophenia. And the whole sequence ends with the question, you know, who are you? Which is the final sort of like phase 2 Lifehouse track. I think it was going to be. So the reason why I mention all of that is because I think basically, as you were saying earlier, what's important about Tommy is that he's trying to invent an idiom, isn't he? Right.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about the overture is like, oh, of course you'd have an overture, but I think he was wound up into doing that by Kit Lambert. But it's Tommy's written in a sort of proto prog style, you know. I mean, I mean, even prog bands don't do overtures, do they, generally? No. So it's very ambitious, Tommy. Bit of a mess, I think. That's the only thing I would say. I think the sort of some of the programmatic changes are not completely logical. Right. And I mean, how much can we go into this here? I mean, like the last track, We're Not Going to Take It, I think is a great track. This is a sort of example of what I'm talking about, like some of the connectors don't quite work. So they're trying to do this large scale thing, but they haven't quite got the chops for it, I think. And so like this last track, We're Not Going to Take It, it's a great number, right? And then it breaks down and it goes into the See Me, Feel Me, that bit. And then, as you said, like it builds up into the ending. But the key changes are not logical, right?
Right.
So he's trying to sort of do something progressive, as it were, but it's not really. He hasn't quite got the, you know, he's not like a Rick Wakeman figure who can work out how to do key changes, you know, at the drop of a hat almost. Now, I think at that level, Quadrophenia's sort of programmatic passages are more tasteful, right? I think it's more coherent. It basically works throughout. And you were talking about this as well, but I think, but the thing is, it's less ambitious, right? Because as you say, it starts with a sorts of some integrated pieces, but then it just devolves into songs, right? And I think actually the sort of transitions in Quadrophenia in some ways work better, but as I say, because it's less ambitious, I'm sort of less fond of it in a way. I mean, actually, Kit Lambert was absent apparently at this point, and I wonder whether he would have, again, sort of, if he'd been more sort of like psychologically present, because he was on heroin at this point. they had managers on heroin who were like, so I mean, brilliant, right? But I think the thing is that actually, I think Tommy, even despite the fact that some of the changes are awkward, like the structural changes, I think quite unexpectedly, they often work, even though they're not quite intuitive, if you know what I mean. And, you know, as I say, that he's sort of inventing an idiom, isn't he? And one other thing, I do, as you said before, I like the fact that he's reiterating themes. I think it's smart. You know, that's a very economical way, right? You've got a good idea and you repeat it over and over again. Yeah. Sometimes too much, possibly. I mean, you know, sometimes it's done ad nauseum. In fact, I think Quadrophenia is slightly better at that level than Tommy is. But I just think I'm fond of the ambition on Tommy, right? And so for that reason, and I'm building up to my points here, I've given Tommy a 12 and Quadrophenia 11, right? Because I think in some ways Quadrophenia is more coherent, but it's less exciting, you know, because it's less ambitious, right?
I mean, to what extent, Tim, do you think this is about expectation? Because when you set something out, when you set out to write something which is an entire piece in itself, which Tommy is, the story of Tommy, and you thread the themes in and they keep dropping in, what you're saying to the listener is sort of judge us by our composition as well, aren't you? Whereas normally, if you just have an album of songs, each song individually you're saying has merit on its own, and you might hate this song, but it doesn't matter because they're not related. You're not judging this as a whole piece. Is there sort of that? You have a mixture of that in Quadrophenia, I think.
Yes, I know what you mean. But the thing is that it all depends on the quality of the songs.
Yeah.
And, and this perhaps takes us into the next
We'll
section.
get on to that, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, look, let's do the final section, 6, musical inspiration, which has got 50 points available for it, because, as I said, we considered it a decisive part, really. So, go for it, Peter. Let us know what you're thinking on this.
So, I mean, this is the big one, isn't it? Because this is actually what people remember mainly about music. It's whether they had a good tune or not, really. I mean, this is how I've sort of approached this. Quadrophenia is entirely written by Pete Townsend. Now, apparently that's not the case on Tommy, although I always assumed, it was, basically. He's just taken over everything on Quadrophenia. He's got this idea of the 4 themes. I mean, there are certain parts of it that I really love. It's probably quicker to do Quadrophenia first, actually, because there's less of it that I actually like on this album. I love The Real Me. It's a great opener. And the way it seeks in from, the Roger Daltrey singing the chorus or whatever it is, and then it drops in. Love that. They sound great. I mean, it's a great opener for the album. The Quadrophenia track, which comes straight afterwards, keeps that momentum going, and it's an obvious attempt to try and write what was sort of on Tommy, to write a long instrumental passage. Seems to work quite well. Cut My Hair I quite like. Why Do I Have to Be Different to Them? It's a strange album that the middle 8 parts are sort of better. There's some great moments where they drop in with the middle 8 on this album, and this is one of them, I think.
I always think, if I may, I always think Bellboy is quite a weak track, but the middle bit, when Keith Moon is singing, "Sometimes I lay down on the beach," that bit's that's the highlight of the track. So yeah,
if only he wasn't singing it. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that there are some great little middle 8s in here. Punk and the Godfather. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the track, but I love the moment. And on the dance floor, Broken Glass. And what is it? And faces slowly go past. All that stuff. That's really good. It's a great little middle bit. It's when Pete Townsend drops in and does that little sort of, the alternative to Roger Daltrey's voice. I think actually they work really well because there's something about his voice which is so different to Roger Daltrey's, isn't it? It's completely different. Dirty Jobs, the drumming on Dirty Jobs, bloody hell. It's just like, what the hell was he on? And you hear him shouting, don't you?
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah,
that shouting is definitely Keith Moon. When he plays a fill, he can't stop himself from the shouting. Sea and Sand I quite like. I ride a GS scooter with my hair cut neat. I love that. In a way, it's like one of my favourite parts on the album, just that little sort of bluesy middle 8 bit. I love that on there. Love Rain on Me. I love the theme on that. Bellboy is sort of, it's like, they've done it so many times, this, haven't they, The Who? Those little, where they drop in, like, Tattoo, songs like that, I'm a Boy, Boris the Spider, things like that. They have a sort of comedy number, don't they? It's like the Ringo moment. It feels a bit like that, like, let's give Keith Moon something amusing to do. And I assume it's Keith Moon doing the Bellboy there. I mean, who else would do it like that? He sounds great. But there are some awful songs on this album. I mean, I think there are some really bad songs. Dr. Jimmy is a horrible song, both lyrically and musically. Drowned is completely pointless. I can't find anything in it. I know that they're trying to sort of build some foundation to build up to the end and drop little bits in, but it really isn't necessary, I don't think. The Rock, this sequence, but the guitar bit's quite nice. There's this nice little dual guitar bits on there. So basically, I mean, I think it's an album with a few good songs, but some superb little middle 8s, but it's not enough. It's not enough to sustain it. It isn't something I'd go to listen to because I would constantly be wishing for the next bit or waiting for that moment, which is only 10 seconds long. But I love that moment. It's not enough to draw me in. So I've given it, about half marks, about 27. Right. Don't know how I came to the conclusion of 27, but 25 seemed mean, I suppose. Shall I carry on?
You've done Quadrophenia, and then Tommy?
Yeah, Tommy. Well, I mean, I just think it's just more inspired. The whole thing is, simple but effective writing. And when I say simple, I mean it's not like the ideas aren't wild and ridiculous. They're just solid, good written ideas. I think there's just so many good tunes on this album. The Captain Morgan bit I love. At the start, setting the theme, that acoustic guitar part. You never really hear him do that much. But suddenly it's in there. What About the Boy? That moment, that shocking moment where I think 21's going to be a good year. And suddenly you go into this really dark moment, don't you, of What About the Boy? And there's the clever writing there, because it's not easy to write that guitar part. It has a kind of rising, there's a darkness to that. And when they do those sorts of things live, it's actually, you listen and think, is that what was on the album? Do they even know what they wrote on the album? But I think that's great. I mean, Amazing Journey is a wonderful song, really good. And when it comes back in with the verse, it just, everything feels fresh all the time. I really like that. Sparks, is that sort of Rael? Is that what we're talking about? That sort of slightly atonal guitar idea, I think is wonderful. I love that. Christmas, I'm not a big fan of the verse, and Tommy doesn't know what day it is. In a way, it's kind of the highlight of the album for me, that. It's such a great little chorus, that. Something about that chorus. It's like it's the badge of the album for me. It's this moment of complete clarity. I love that.
I think if I can just say, when that comes in Christmas, there's a I feel like you've made it through side one, and then that track comes in at the beginning of side two, I believe, and I always think, oh God, I love this album.
Right.
When the chorus of that track comes in, I think, they're still going with this amazing music.
This is the thing, isn't it? Is you're waiting for it to come a cropper, and it doesn't. And that's a wonderful chorus. I love that. Tommy, Can You Hear Me? Just the him, not the song Tommy, Can You Hear Me, but that moment is really great. Sort of singing into the void. I think that's a wonderful tune as well. Again, very unusual guitar arrangement as well. Odd. The
interesting chords.
Yeah, very interesting chords. When you hear them do it when I heard on the Afton Down one, I'm sure they're not doing the same thing. It's somehow they've changed it. But the Underture is a wonderful moment of suspense, 10 minutes. It's brilliantly done because it balances the album out. It's what is necessary. Sorry, I keep going on. Pinball Wizard is obviously a great track as well. Go to the Mirror. I like the way they blend all the themes on that. There's lots of little bits. Feel me, touch. They'll get it all in, don't they? It's all in there. Tommy, Can You Hear Me? Have you seen the little video of that where they're all singing it around the guitar? It's like, they make it sound like it's like a country and western thing, like it's a funny song. But it's not, is it? It's this darkness, sort of with the sheen of sort of maple syrup on top. It's kind of weird like that. It's like, is that fun? That idea, And obviously, of course, we're not going to take it. No idea why they call it that. What are they even singing about at that point? But it is a wonderful end to the album. I think even the poor songs, if there is such a thing on this album, the sort of poor songs are good compared to others. If you look at other albums around that time, you think, yeah, that is a crap song. That is a crap song. What's it even doing on the album? There's not a moment, I don't think, in Tommy really where you can say that. I think only when you get to the really silly stuff, you could say, well, it's a bit daft. Why is that in there? It's a bit silly. But it really doesn't matter, I don't think, because they're just odd moments. The rest of it is so well crafted. No real fillers, not particularly. So I've given it a 46 out of 50. It's a good album.
Okay, right, good. Well, look, interesting. So, I found it very interesting when you said you were trying to track down where Quadrophenia goes off the rails, if I understood you right. And I had the same experience I've always had that experience with Quadrophenia. You said Helpless Dancer. I'm just looking at the track listing now. For me, it's The Dirty Jobs. I mean,
yeah.
Right, and so I mean, this takes me to my main comment here, which is I think that basically the first side of Quadrophenia works really well, and then I really like I'm One, the first track on side two, and then for me the album kind of falls off a cliff, and it doesn't manage to claw its way back up. I wasn't expecting to use that metaphor. Doesn't claw its way back up until side four, really. I can just about live with Dr. Jimmy and Mr. Jim. even though that lyric is absurd, because it's
Lazy.
it kind of takes you into it takes you into the ending. I think The Rock and Love Rain Over Me. I don't agree with everything you said there, because I think The Rock and Love Rain Over Me is like a really great ending. So I feel like Quadrophenia should have been a single album. Like it would have been.
Yeah.
I know that this is a classic trope,
Yeah.
White Album,
Yeah.
Lamb Lies Down, whatever. I think like it really would have worked. It would have been an awesome single album. This, and as I say, I know that's an easy thing to say, but I just think there's not enough good material to sustain it through sides 2 and sides 3. So I often wonder, like as I said, I never had the vinyl copy, but I wonder what would have motivated people to keep turning the album. Right, let's listen to side 3 of Quadrophenia now. Yeah, well, you were great songs, Sea and Sand, Drowned and Bellboy, whatever. Now, and then on the other hand, Tommy is basically all brilliant, right? And I agree with you about this. I think the only weak spot, you said that it basically hasn't got a bad track on it, and I know what you mean, but I did find one, I think, which is Welcome on side 4. But by that point, it's too late for them to do any damage to the album, because it's so great. This is
is that the Come to This House?
Come to This House. That's right. That's right. But you don't care by that point. I don't think Sally Simpson is an amazing track, but it doesn't really. It's all right,
Yeah, but it doesn't matter, does it?
That's right. Welcome is actually a bad track, but by this point you've heard so many great tracks, so you don't even care, I would say that I don't quite agree with you about Underture. I think it's too long. I think they could have cut it in half and stuck another track in there. Almost anything would have done from my perspective. But I think you're right. It is contemplative, so it doesn't matter that much. It doesn't, as I say, it doesn't derail the album.
No.
But to all intents and purposes, I find Tommy to be like a sort of a bit messy, but basically a perfect album in terms of musical inspiration. So it's sort of a crucible of inspiration, I would say. I mean, to keep that level of inspiration up over a whole double album is incredibly impressive. I like the sort of mix of the short and long tracks. Some diversity there. The short tracks seem to balance out the longer ones. They act sort of like the short tracks act like interludes. And the high points are so high. I've written down 1921, Amazing Journey, Christmas, The Acid Queen, Go to the Mirror, I'm Free, and We're Not Going to Take It. I mean, we've got all those tracks on an album. You're laughing, aren't you? I mean, how bad do the other tracks have to be to spoil it?
Also, it's like in reverse to what you're saying about it being a single album. I mean, Tommy, I don't think you could even get it onto a single album, could you? It needs space.
Absolutely.
Because there's so many good ideas.
Absolutely, that's right. I mean, I think that I mean, that was my conclusion, basically. Quadrophenia could have been a single album. Tommy needs to be a double, right?
Yeah.
I think the only other thing, perhaps, finally, I wanted to mention here is that this is a bit more, sort of, what's the word? Tricky. I think that the sort of lyrical writing that you get on Tommy, I don't mean lyric writing, I mean the lyrical writing, the kind of subtleties. The sort of almost the Baroque aspect, I think, gets slightly lost between Tommy and Quadrophenia. I talked earlier about the difference between the themes or the relationship between the themes. I think that's really interesting, the way that they relate to each other thematically. But I think that they do lose something, sort of in terms of composition between the two albums. I think the writing on Quadrophenia is basically less experimental and more predictable.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like they could just sort of, by this point they're doing all of their songs are like basically 120 BPM, and the
feels like they're jamming a bit.
That's right, and the chord changes are not quite as interesting, and I almost feel like sometimes they could have just, by this point, they could have just started playing and just kept playing for the whole album in the same time signature and key with a similar sort of guitar. And actually, by the time you get to the Who by numbers, that's basically what they're doing, in my opinion, right? But I think that I've never been a big fan of Who's Next, I have to say. Now, this is a very controversial thing because people bloody love this album. But I absolutely love Tommy, but I think by Who's Next, they're kind of The writing is sort of less interesting, and I think that in a way that carries on into Quadrophenia. But I think they managed to get some of the sort of fire back. I think you're right. The Real Me is an amazing. I mean, all those like Quadrophenia, the Real Me, Punk and the Godfather. I think they're all really nice. But yeah, as I said, like it could have been a single album basically. So what I've got in terms of scores is I think I've put 49 out of 50 for Tommy. I think it basically couldn't be better. I think 50 out of 50 is probably, a push, but I think that it basically unimprovable, And Quadrophenia I've actually put 25 because I think it's half brilliant. Basically.
Similar.
Yeah, very similar. So,
I was going to say about the thing is, I always felt a bit like with the Rolling Stones. They had a run of good singles, up to about 1970, and then they just went off and naturally sort of just ended up drifting. I know people will hate this, but there's nothing I find interesting after like 1970. With the Who, there was always that potential because actually they're quite interesting up to a certain point, and then it's almost like they'll just drift off into this rock world, won't they? And they are like that live. They like the rock. They like the attitude. They could quite happily just jam away and rock out, Yeah. But that's kind of what Quadrophenia suffers from a bit, which is you feel like when you spend like 30 seconds thinking, what are they actually doing? Where is this going? They're just playing, and that's what disappoints me about it a bit, And I feel like with the Who's Next, in a way, I like that album, but what I think is it does connect those two things together quite well, which is the writing I think is quite good, but it's also got that rock element to it, which is gone beyond what we know in the 60s, but it's maybe a nice crossover of those two things at that point.
Well, I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree about that.
We'll have to do a podcast on it.
So look, can I give you my totals then? I've got
yes.
For Tommy, I've got 88 percent, and Quadrophenia for me gets 66. Right. So what are your totals then?
Sorry, hang on. They're very similar to mine.
What are your totals first of all?
Very similar. So I've got 87 for Tommy, which is one off from yours, and I've got 64 for Quadrophenia.
Wow,
you actually rate it slightly higher than me.
That's incredible. Do you want to do a little tally?
Yes, while you discuss other stuff, I'll.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know really, what else to say. I mean, I think my feeling overall is that Tommy is the better album musically, as I've made clear, by quite a long chalk. But thematically, I do think it's less convincing, both sort of philosophically and aesthetically, as it were. I think Quadrophenia has lots of good musical moments, but I don't think it's a musical classic. However, I do think that the theme is more interesting. That would be my final conclusion.
95. What the hell? Sorry, I'm just trying to work this out.
That's all right.
So it's the mathematics of it. What have you got here? 190s. That's.
If you like, I could read some more of the lines that I dislike.
No, I think that's basically between this 87.5. I don't know why I took the time to work that out when it's obvious. Okay, I've got them. I've got the percentages.
Right. So what's the final crapper ranking for the two albums?
So Tommy, for all our categories, gets 87.5%, which is high. That is a high count. And then Quadrophenia gets 65%. Right,
okay. That seems about right, doesn't it?
It does, but Quadrophenia's done quite well out of that, actually.
Yeah.
It seems reasonably good.
Saying that we like it, but it's just not Tommy. Do you want to show you're working? No. Okay, all right, good.
It's complicated.
All right, brilliant. Well, look, thanks a lot, Peter. I hope that people found that a productive discussion. If not, feel free to write in, with complaints. And please remember to like and subscribe if you're on the YouTube channel, and if you could see your way clear to giving us a rating on the podcast, we would be most grateful. And we will see you again very soon. I think next week, but I that remains to be confirmed. But for now, it's goodbye from Peter.
And it's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.